Shouldn't the program at UNC with the trials and tribulations of the last 3 years, the ups, the downs, I'm saying last 3 years like the 3 seasons prior to this one, you make it to an NCAA final. You have the dramatic games against Coach K. You win both of those, the last game in Cameron and the Final Four. You go to the next year where you lose everything, right? You don't even make it back to the tournament. You started as the number 1 team in the country. Then last year, you ride that roller coaster. 2 big wins against Duke in that rivalry game, which is coming up on Saturday. You make it to the ACC championship where you fall to NC State. You make it to the Sweet 16. Like all of this up and down, I think you'd be grizzled. I think you'd be ready for the grinding nature of a college basketball game. But instead, it seems like every time you're in a close game, you're almost surprised you're there. How did this happen? We're a good team. How are we in a close game against Pitt? And I'm going like, well, if 2 years ago didn't prove to you that talent on the roster doesn't guarantee anything, you're never going to learn. So I thought it was a good time, and Dennis thought it was a good time that we take a moment here because there's the Battle of the Blues coming up this weekend, right? There is UNC at Duke. The first rivalry, by the way, first time Duke-UNC, you can bet on it legally in the state of North Carolina. So there's this big game that everybody's going to be really jacked up about with 2 coaches that are in similar points of their program takeovers, right? We know that Hubert got there 1 year earlier. So 4 years for Hubert Davis and 3 for Jon Scheyer. But I actually think just by the nature of the programs, they're in very similar situations. Because UNC, for better or worse, I don't think it's right or wrong, their players tend to stay longer. They have more seniors. They have more guys that play for that 5th year, use the COVID year. Duke, if you're not out your first year, you're probably out your second year, and it's pretty rare that you make it to 3 like Tyrese Proctor. So because of the turnover rates, it's like the same ownership level for Hubert Davis and Jon Scheyer. Like it's the same, they're guys. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
A few holdovers. Like the recruitment may have started with the previous coach, but it finished with them. So it's like it's their program now. It used to be you couldn't really judge a coach until their recruits got to junior year. Mm-hmm. Now with the transfer portal and with one and dones, it's not the same. But that was the move. And just thinking of this season, and how we talk about these 2 teams every single time they play. I think just the narratives, the storylines show you why UNC fans are starting to have the conversations they're starting to have and why Duke fans are starting to have the celebrations they're starting to have. When we talk about Jon Scheyer, we talk about the things he's learned, the things he's fixed from their struggles the first couple years that he was the coach. With Hubert Davis, we're to the point with some frustration of how is this still happening, right? Think about it like how coaches talk to players, okay? And I'll use young players. How about Bryce Young? That's a name we're all familiar with, right? The quarterback for the Panthers. It was last season. Got to get my years correct. His rookie year, there was I think it was the Falcons, and it may have been early on. He threw the same interception twice. It was Jesse Bates, I believe, was the safety. It was the same route. It was the same, like later in the game, you would have thought you were seeing a replay. And I went, that's more concerning than any of the other interceptions because he didn't learn from the first mistake to not do it again. Bates baited him into the same throw. You're not mad at a young player for making mistakes. Young players are going to make mistakes. You get mad when they start making the same mistakes over and over, more than once. So now point that towards these 2 coaches, right? Scheyer and Hubert Davis. You're not going to be mad when they make mistakes, right? Because they're learning. They're young. Mm-hmm. They're like a 22-year-old NFL quarterback. They are newborns as head coaches. It's when it doubles back. So Jon Scheyer, early in his run with Duke, I screamed and yelled about all this kind of stuff. They didn't have edge. They had a whole bunch of really talented basketball players that whined to the refs a lot and didn't have that, like, no, give me the ball, I'm going to dunk on them so they know. Jon Scheyer noticed the issue, realized the mistake. This year, they have players that are more kind of like assassins, right? They're out there to, okay, you're not going to give me that call? Beautiful. Now I know it's a physical game. Ball up top. Like, that's how they think this year. They recruited different personalities. He saw a problem. He didn't make it twice. Now, what was the second year under Hubert Davis? Came into it with all the expectations in the world. You had made it to the Final Four. You returned everybody. You had
4 starters coming back.
You had All-Americans. You had All-ACC, and you were ready to roll. And what happened? Never added up to the sum of the parts, right? The talent never equated to enough wins, and they ended up missing the tournament. So then last year, well, you got R.J. Davis, the All-American, right? You got the ACC Player of the Year returning. You have a 5-star in Elliot Cadeau, who's one of the top 12 recruits in the history of UNC, according to UNC. He elects to come back for his sophomore year. You add 2 more 5-stars. Everybody's excited. You come into the game, come into the season ranked 9th in the country. Same thing, right? You're not living up to expectations. You're losing too many games. It's the same mistake twice. Maybe not as egregious as the team that came back from the Final Four, but not Final Four, Final Two, but it's still just as egregious. That's the thing that's going to frustrate the heck out of me. That's the thing that's going to get UNC fans upset. Nobody said like, oh my gosh, nobody since Doherty has missed a tournament the way that Hubert did after his first missed tournament. If they miss it this year, you're going to hear, they haven't missed 2 out of 4 years in the tournament since Doherty was the coach. You're going to start hearing that because now it's not the rookie coach learning. All right, you had to learn that one the hard way, but don't make that mistake again. Now it's a pattern. I like Hubert Davis. I think he does some things well. I think he can be a good schematic coach. But as I said earlier, you know what you're doing when you take over UNC. When you replace Roy Williams, you know what's going on.
Oh, especially because both these coaches played for their respective programs underneath those legendary coaches, Coach K and Roy, and were assistants under them too. They know. It's not like, whoa, I thought, but a little bit more than I expected. No, they fully knew going in what the standard is at each of their respective programs. And I think the big thing with North Carolina right now, there doesn't feel like there's any stability. Like you mentioned, year 1 under Hubert, they make that crazy run. Remember, it was a crazy run over like last 6 weeks of the season or so to get to NCAA tournament as an 8 seed, and then they make their run to the championship game. So everyone's like, oh, okay, like maybe just first-year head coach figuring it out. They caught fire, carried that momentum, didn't make it. So it's like peak, valley. Sweet 16 last year, peak this year, valley. There's nothing stable about it. Whereas with Jon Scheyer, first 3 years, hey, we got to the second round, lost to a physical Tennessee team. Okay, that's something we got to recruit and build on. Last year, get to an Elite 8. This year, one of the top 2 teams in the country beat the number 1 team in the country in Auburn earlier this year, and they're only getting better, it feels like, and they're adding more to their games as they go along. Oh, now they have a 2-3 zone. It's a constant ascension for Duke right now, whereas Carolina, it's just peaks and valleys.
I mean, if you're looking for a very specific way to personify how different it is this season, Duke playing their most recent game. They won by 10. It was NC State. Goodness gracious. The kind of anecdote that comes out of it is Duke started off playing soft, playing no finesse. NC State punched him in the mouth early, and Jon Scheyer said as much, right? Pushed the right button by saying, too much finesse, you're playing soft, said it to the team, said it to Cooper Flagg individually. By the second half, it's fixed. They're playing more aggressive. They're bringing the fight to NC State. They win by double figures.
Scheyer called a timeout in the first half, and then out of that timeout, I think Duke goes on like an 8-0 run.
So that's one side.
Yeah.
And then compare that to Hubert Davis, not after last night's game, but after the previous game, which was the overtime win against Boston College. He's going, yeah, they find it when they need it at the end, but we need it the whole game. It's fixing it artfully with succinct language in timeouts and halftime, which makes that game into a better game in the second half for your team, versus still grasping at how to fix it in the after game press conference. It's just it's different. Things are developing at different rates. We have Jay Williams from last night on the broadcast, who was the color commentator for that UNC Pitt game. And, you know, as UNC fans will say, he's a Duke guy, but the pictures, I'll say this, the footage that he was saying this while he was watching the game matched up with his words. So there's some credibility here.
Look at Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is huddling in the middle of the court. It already looks as if with 24.9 seconds left to go, North Carolina being down only 4 points, that the game feels over. But none of them have huddled. None of them have talked to each other. And this is what Hubert Davis has been talking about, Kevin, about the lack of leadership on this team. Look, I know they're down 5. But you're never out of it until you're out of it. But you need to have communication about what you're doing next and about what you're going to run offensively, what you need to be in defensively, and there's no quit in your voice.
And again, the pictures, they matched up, right? It's not, you know, 3 guys were talking and Jay Williams was saying they weren't huddling because everybody, no, like they were in their own corners of the court.
Mm-hmm.
That's not great.
Carolina did not score a point the last 3 minutes and 24 seconds of the game.
And this is what Hubert has been talking about. I'm going like, well, if Hubert is aware of the problem, fix it, my dude.
Mm-hmm.
I know teams that have rules. Like every free throw, we're getting together, and there's like a hierarchy. If, you know, the captain is on the court, he talks. If he's on the bench, this guy talks. If both of them are on the bench, this guy talks. Like you lead the huddle, and it's part of their team building. Maybe you have to. You don't want to have to do that, but maybe you do. Put it in writing. Make them run if it doesn't happen. You don't want to have to treat the University of North Carolina Tar Heels that way, but if you see a problem and it's not being fixed, fix it. You're the head coach, or you're the assistant coach, or you're the senior. Whoever wants to fix it, go ahead. I don't care who it is.